Greetings folks, and welcome to another 81632-bit. I'm your host Rob, and today I'm going to be looking at something that some people may find somewhat contentious, and that's the idea of defining console generations and console power by using the bits scale. Now, if you're not really sure what that is because you're a young person, this thing hasn't really been around modern consoles, the idea of bits is based on how powerful and how big an instruction in terms of bits that a CPU can process. Now, up until a certain point, seemed quite straightforward. You had 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit, and supposedly 128-bit chips. However, the reality of the situation was somewhat different to this, as we'll see. Now, in basic terms, what generally has happened over the years is the early consoles have been defined as 8-bit systems. The consoles that followed those in the early 90s were defined as 16-bit systems, and these were then followed obviously by 32 and 64-bit systems as the 90s wore on to the millennium. But it really wasn't that simple and straightforward. Now, it's pretty easy to say that most of the early consoles were indeed 8-bit. They used processors like Zilog's Z80 CPU or the 6502 CPU, which were very definitely simple, basic 8-bit CPUs. Fine. However, take a look at this game here. This looks like it's playing on an 8-bit system. It doesn't look hugely dissimilar to the kind of things that were coming out for its competitors like the Atari 2600. Well, this is some software running on the Intellivision. And the Intellivision was a 16-bit system. It used a 16-bit CPU on a 16-bit address bus. But, to all intents and purposes, it looks exactly the same as its 8-bit peers. And frankly, a lot of gamers probably do just classify it as an 8-bit system even though it isn't. Now, even within the 8-bit world, things could vary from the basic blockiness of the Atari 2600 to the kind of graphics that were being thrown about by, say, the Master System or some later NES titles. Again, 8-bit systems, all of them, but vastly different in terms of power. But then things start to get messy because as we hit the late 80s, we get into the point in time where we get into the 16-bit era. But even this becomes somewhat messy. Yes, the Mega Drive used a Motorola 68000 CPU, which was a 16-bit CPU, albeit one that could work as a 32-bit CPU internally, but was generally in its base form running 16-bit instructions on a 16-bit bus. Ergo, it was a 16-bit CPU. Its competitors, on the other hand, the Super Nintendo, is broadly considered a 16-bit system. However, its core CPU is actually a 6502 variant on steroids, as it were, which is technically still an 8-bit CPU, but we count it as 16-bit. It gets fuzzy. And then there's the PC Engine stroke TurboGrafx 16. Now, certainly in the US market, this system was promoted as a 16-bit system because it had a 16-bit graphics chip. However, once again, the CPU was an 8-bit CPU, so the PC Engine and TurboGrafx 16 really are 8-bit systems, but people call them 16-bit because of a technicality. Now, this is fine, but it continues to get complex and more complex as we move into what people call the 32-bit era. Now, the Saturn and the PlayStation both certainly ran on 32-bit chips, as did the 3DO. the CD32 from Commodore ran on a fully 32-bit version of the Motorola 68000, which was the 68020 chip. But then we get to systems like the Atari Jaguar and the Nintendo 64, both of which claim to be 64-bit systems, and in their own technically fuzzy ways are. Now, the Jaguar did have 64 bits of power, albeit mostly coming from two 32-bit chips running in tandem, controlled by a 16-bit processor, which Atari said made it a 16-bit machine. Now, in a way, yes, but also in a way, absolutely not. It was neither one nor the other. Not really a 32-bit system, not really a 16-bit system if you're going to be generous about it, but that's a personal opinion. And then there's the Nintendo 64, which, yes, had a 64-bit CPU, although most developers only used it in 32-bit mode because the 64-bit instructions were quite difficult to use and really didn't lend themselves too well to some of the operations that game developers required of it. Now, does this make it not a 64-bit system? Well, again, it's a yes and no situation, because technically the system was 64-bit, it just wasn't necessarily used as a 64-bit system. Yeah, nice and clear there, but especially for marketing purposes, it was 64-bit. The next generation on gets even more confusing. Sony claimed that the Emotion engine in the PlayStation 2 was a 128-bit processor, which it was, but again, the rest of the system around it wasn't, so it wasn't really 128-bit as such. And Nintendo's sequel to the N64 was technically, if you went by defining power by the bits of the CPU, a weaker system, and I say that in inverted commas, because the PowerPC CPU behind the GameCube was a step back to a pure 32-bit system. So, yeah. And I mean, I'll be fair, it was after the Saturn and PlayStation, that generation, that magazines and developers and gamers themselves generally stopped referring to systems by their bits, even though you did get a few people who called the Dreamcast a 128-bit system, which it wasn't. And, you know, contemporary systems these days, the Switch 2, the PS5, the Xbox Series, are all technically 64-bit systems being based off existing and quite mature technologies. But, you know, I will argue, having said everything that I've just said over the preceding 6 or so minutes, using bits as a way of defining the power of a console always was stupid and pointless. It was easy, simple marketing shorthand, because you could go, well, this is more powerful because that's 8-bit, this is 16-bit. But as we've seen with things like the Intellivision, the PC Engine, all the way through to the N64, it didn't really mean anything, because these systems sat outside what was supposedly the definitions, but were defined in a way which made them fit the current definition at the time, even if they didn't really do it. Now, some people will tell me I'm wrong about this, I'm sure, in the comments, and I don't know what I'm talking about because blah 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 blah, because that's the nature of the beast. People will disagree with me, but if you do, or if you do agree with me, feel free to let me know down below. I read every comment I get, and unless it's particularly egregious, I'll let it sit there for other people to read as well. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, please do hit like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified of whenever I upload a new video. If you really want to support the channel as well, there are a number of ways you can do this. There are links in the description below to my Ko-fi page for a one-off donation, to my Patreon and to my YouTube channel memberships. I do want to thank my current members at this time. You'll see their names on screen now. These guys are awesome. I have much love and respect for them. If you want to join them and get your name up there, as I said, links down below. But I've been Rob. This has been 81632-bit, and hopefully I will see you on the next video. So long for now.